And now we're going to change gears a little bit here. We're going to have Justin Bush introduce Lloyd Knight from the state of Idaho Department of Agriculture and go over some of the current things we are experiencing right now in the region. And we'll call Lloyd up and we'll have Justin do a little introduction here on this as well. Thanks.
Well, yeah, thank you all so much. And thank you so much, Lloyd, for traveling to this event. Lloyd and I go back a long time, but where Lloyd and I really connected was during the Merrimack mossball incident back in 2021. And ultimately, invasive mussels, invasive zebra mussels were imported to the United States on plant products. And I feel like Lloyd and I made a deep connection during that when we were looking at best practices for response. And Lloyd's really been a guide for me in learning how we should be proactive in our response. And we've been fortunate enough that invasive mussels were found in Idaho because I feel like Idaho is really well positioned to implement a rapid response. And they've really been a model for how we should be approaching this issue. We've been allowed the opportunity to be observers during both of their treatments as observers of the state of Washington. And we've learned so much from what they're doing. So I'm really pleased to be bringing Lloyd Knight so that we can all learn from what Idaho has been doing. And with that, Lloyd, over to you.
Thank you, sir. If it starts feedback, I'll take that as a message to quit. I'll just sit down. Okay, so thank you, Justin, for the invite to be here today with everybody and on such a bright, cheery day here in Spokane. I've spent a lot of time in Washington the last few weeks, just between work travel and personal travel. My wife's family farms in Colfax area. And when we left there on Sunday, my wife said, wouldn't it be better if you just went to Spokane now? I'm like, yeah, but honey, all this togetherness in the car back to Boise. So here we are. And I came back in again yesterday. So, okay. So I kind of have a couple of goals in the presentation. One is to talk a little bit about what we've done with the treatment and with our program in Idaho, the 2 treatments we've done. But I especially wanted to focus on how we've done it, because I think from a standpoint of preparation and getting yourself ready to think about the possibility of having to do this, I think that's probably more important than probably what we've done, because what we've done I think has been very unique, and we know it's very unique to a place and time in Idaho in that location. And before I go any further, I want to make sure Nick Zerflew from our group is here. He's our Bureau Chief for Invasive Species. He's a very important cog in our workings, and I appreciate him being here with us today as well. So just a little bit about our program for those of you that don't know. Our program's been in place since 2008, 2009. It's about the same time I got to the agency about that time. There's already been reference to Representative Anderson and his work that he did to get the Idaho Invasive Species Act legislation authorizing statutes put in place in 2008. 2009, the legislature put in place the funding mechanism and a little bit more detail about what they wanted us to do. And in those first few years of the program, really the first year, we were moving very quickly to try to get something stood up, even if we didn't know exactly what it was we were standing up or what it was going to look like when we were done. So certainly we knew that all of those components that you see on the screen of prevention and education and detection and all those things were in that authorizing legislation. But a lot of that hadn't really been done yet comprehensively in a state program. There are states that at this same time had started to kind of delve into that and think about it. But we really didn't have a blueprint to look at as we built ours. Unique to Idaho, this program is in the Idaho State Department of Agriculture. In most states, including Washington, obviously it's in the Fish and Wildlife Agency. I think for us, it probably was a good foresight into how we think about invasive species and where they fit operationally in how we do things. Representative Dye already referred to what it's like in the agronomy and the agriculture world, we're very familiar with in our agency, of how you approach noxious weeds. And you're never going to have just one sprayed project and be done, ever. And we kind of knew that when we went into our treatment last year, even if we didn't want to have that mindset. We wanted to get it all done. But we recognize that these are long-term things that we deal with. And certainly the program funding and the Invasive Species Council were also in that original statute. I will say our council doesn't really have an active administrative function within our program. That's really reserved at the agency, but we do rely on our council as kind of that brain trust that we'll bounce ideas off of and get an understanding of priorities and some of those things, but they don't really have an operational function. I noticed this morning when I was going through slides again that I have a couple of numbers upset in here that aren't quite right, but you'll get the basic idea that we have our funding from 3 primary sources: our sticker fund, our dedicated fund, our general fund, and the federal cost share that we have through the Army Corps. We have, up until before last year, we were looking at about $5.5 to $6 million a year in general fund, another million-ish in dedicated funds, and then the 50-50 cost share for the operation of check stations. So you're looking at a budget that covered, at the time, everything that we needed to do for monitoring and surveillance, outreach and education, all those kinds of activities, but a huge lion's share of that went to the prevention efforts in running the check stations and in monitoring and surveillance. We've run on average for the past several years, prior to 2023, roughly 20-ish stations a year. Now that varied at times, but depending on COVID and labor availability and all those things, but for the most part, we ran approximately 20 stations a year. And we've performed well over 1.2 million inspections since the program inception. On average, we were running before 2023, roughly 100,000 inspections a year. Sometimes more, sometimes less. COVID, I think we all saw the increase in activity that COVID generated for us in this space. So certainly those numbers had been going up. In 2024, that jumped to 156,000 inspections last year. Now that focused a lot of those containment efforts that we had in the mid-snake. We'll talk about some of those. We also, from day one of the program, monitoring and surveillance of Idaho water bodies was a primary function. It's one that it's not as splashy or as sexy, if you will, as watercraft inspection, if there is such a thing, but it is vitally important because we knew that if we ever were going to have an infestation that we identified, the importance of finding that infestation as early as possible was going to be key. It was going to be key in our response. It was going to be key in making sure it didn't spread. Monitoring and surveillance always was one of the most important, still is, one of the most important functions of our program. And as we built the program originally, the team identified the need to have multiple sample events statewide throughout the sampling season. And that was always a significant part of our strategy. We never were a one sample and done in a water body. I don't even think in that first year did we do that in any water bodies. I think we really tried to focus. We grew it to include more water bodies over the years, but we always recognized that importance to find those early. So we've taken over 15,000 samples over the life of the program. Before last year, we were up to about 1,600 samples a year. We had ramped that up in the last couple of years. We're obviously way above that now, given what's been going on. But just sample, sample, sample. Those have predominantly been Vellager samples for microscopy with a DNA confirmation. We hadn't got into eDNA for a number of other reasons. We're dipping our toe in that now, again, for other reasons that kind of go into how we want to manage identifying where populations are, where we want to focus efforts and all of that. But we made the conscious decision after the 2023 treatment that we would double our sample efforts statewide. So we are now at a level of about 3,000, 3,200 samples a year, and we'll stay there for the foreseeable future unless we increase that. We also, in that first year, put together a rapid response plan. And I will say that from the outset, and I look at a couple of faces in the room, including Stephen Phillips, who, believe it or not, I think had dark hair when I first met him at this time. We put together this rapid response plan really as something that wouldn't outline the details of what a response would look like, in the sense that it didn't give us a shopping list or a laundry list of activities. It did, for us, guide us in how we would make decisions in identifying infested water bodies, who we would communicate with, and some of those things. So we really let it be a guide for us in some of those decision-making factors. And I think when you think about, for us, when we think about rapid response, we recognized right away, again, this isn't unique to Idaho, but we recognized that how we would respond and what that response would look like would be very different in different locations around the state. Now, we don't have the mile-wide Columbia River as you do on the border between Washington and Oregon. And we don't have statewide salmon issues. We do have ESA issues. We do have some salmon and fish issues. We do have native mussels and those things. But we also have, again, not entirely unique to Idaho, but we have a lot of consumptive use in some of those water bodies. We have lakes in northern Idaho that serve as not only a point of recreation, but certainly a point of drinking water for those neighborhoods and those HOAs as well. We've dealt with those as we've dealt with Eurasian water milfoil. But we knew there would be enough variation statewide that we didn't want to try to write a plan that would presuppose what those actions would be. That's a point that I'll come back to later in the presentation when we get into some of our how we did what we did. Those survey efforts have evolved to what you see on the screen. For those of you that have any familiarity with Idaho geography, I think you'll see we didn't miss many spots as far as rivers and streams and lakes statewide. Certainly, if we could get our folks there and have them be able to get their work done in a timely manner, that's where we are. There's a gap in the Salmon River Wilderness there in the middle because it takes you several days on a raft to get through there. Although based on this last year's activities that Nick and Jeremy did, that's not necessarily a deal breaker. But you'll see that we spent a lot of time statewide in every water body we could get to. And we wanted to identify, and early on we made the decision we weren't going to base our sampling based on calcium levels. We weren't going to base it on human activity necessarily. We wanted to sample as much as we could everywhere we could statewide. So I'm going to kind of bounce a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the two treatment events, and then I'm going to come back to kind of the how. So last year, after we did all of that treatment as we do each year, at the end of September, we identified that we found veligers in the Middle Snake. So for us, the Middle Snake is an area defined right around Twin Falls in the Snake River Canyon. We identified those veligers. We immediately went into a quarantine and delimit stance, meaning that we shut everything off in the river. We had those positive veligers. We got our genetic confirmation. Actually, before we got genetic back, Nick had called me and said, hey, we think we found veligers. And he and I went and sampled on a Sunday. We thought we were being very stealthy and came to find out later that somebody said, you know, I saw those two guys out there on that Sunday and I couldn't figure out what they were doing with the state. I guess we're not so stealthy. But we immediately went into an effort to try to delimit and define what that infestation might look like down there. We were able to start to identify what we call plumes of veligers. There was enough of them at that time that we could identify that, map them, eventually sent divers down into one of those areas where a plume was, and we were able to find one live mussel on a rock about 18 feet down below Shoshone Falls, below Pillar Falls. No, Shoshone Falls. So we knew we had something. And we immediately went into that mode of, okay, we're going to treat. So we went through our process of identifying what products were available. We found one that was already a pesticide, a chelated copper product that was already registered as a pesticide in the state of Idaho for this purpose. So we were very fortunate that way. We built a treatment plan, and we did a treatment from October 3rd to the 13th of 2 96-hour treatments of having the river up to 1 part per million of copper, according to the label. To our knowledge, it's the first treatment of that size and scope that's ever been attempted in North America. That wasn't lost on us, and sometimes we had to remind ourselves of that when things weren't always neat and tidy and perfect, that we were running on something that really didn't have a roadmap. And when we got out of that treatment, of course, we made that commitment of of expanding our monitoring efforts statewide, maintaining the quarantine in that area of the river, and looking at what's next. The legislature made some significant investments, very significant investments to add to the program, an additional $6.5 million. They transferred some funds to our invasive species fund. They provided some additional monies specific to the quarantine that we had to maintain in the mid-snake, some additional positions, which of course were welcome. And we were able to expand the program in nearly every aspect. In the partners we worked with, in the sampling effort, stations, hours, all of those things. And this was for a program that really was pretty robust to begin with. We had been trying to continually expand our watercraft inspection stations, the work they were doing, the law enforcement support for those. Because again, we're an ag agency, and ag agencies in Idaho don't have guns and badges. Our folks in the legislature don't want to go that far with us, thankfully. But that meant we have contracts, operational contracts with law enforcement agencies. And so we'd been expanding that. So between the two treatment events, we doubled the statewide monitoring. And as soon as we could get in the water and the water was good, in that treatment area, we did some post-treatment monitoring last fall, but then we had to wait. We had to wait through a long winter. We had to wait through spring runoff, which in this area, I think it went through, April or May, I think, before the water really came down or got up in temperature and came down in flow that we could get in there. Sampled all summer. We're feeling pretty good. And then on September 24th, Nick called again. I'm going to quit taking calls from Nick. We think we have some veligers in the area again. And oh, by the way, we also are going to add an area in Twin Falls Reservoir. So on the screen, if you go to the far left of the map, and I know this is a little hard to see, but if you go to the far left, you see that little triangle, looks like an island. There's an area there on the far left that is kind of the bottom of our treatment area from last year. It's Centennial Park. And then you can see the bridge goes across the river to the first yellow dot. That's Pillar Falls. That Pillar Falls to the left of the map was one section of treatment last year. The next yellow dot goes up to Shoshone Falls. That was another treatment area. And then to the dot on the right is Twin Falls, the actual falls and hydro facility, not the town. That last year was our upper treatment area. So we had sampled there. We had found veligers there last year. We didn't find anything above the Twin Falls hydro facility last year. This year we did. We found veligers. So our treatment area was the three areas from last year plus the addition of Twin Falls Reservoir. We weren't finding as many veligers as we did last year. And in fact, they were so scattered and few, we didn't really have a plume to look for adults this year. So we didn't find any adults this year, but to be honest, we didn't really look very far either because we didn't really have a plume to look at. And it's a big river, it takes a lot of time. We just wanted to make sure we got in and got them again. So clearly we'd had some effect on the mussel population there, but we're still seeing veligers. Can't figure out where they came from. So we did additional delimit sampling in the area. That included microscopy, and we did some eDNA. First time we'd really used eDNA in the program. We're utilizing it more as a smoke alarm than anything else, as kind of a backup to, and something to kind of show us if we think we need to be in an area. Didn't really show us anything different than we expected. But the veligers that you see on the screen, the green dots with the numbers on them, that's how many veligers we found in that area. Not very many. In an area of, what, Nick, 8-9 miles in that treatment area, you're looking at 20 to 30 veligers total in that entire stretch this year. Not very many. And not really concentrated necessarily in an area that really, like I said, gives you anywhere to go. Very small part of the river in the big scope of things, and not a lot of activity going on there. So, for 2024, we extended the treatment area into the Twin Falls Reservoir. We found a total of 3 veligers there this year. It did not get treated last year again because we didn't find anything. And last year we were in a position of wanting to be not bite off more than we could chew from a regulatory standpoint. We didn't want to go treat an area we didn't find anything in and have to justify that to EPA or anybody else. We sampled it very heavy last year, Twin Falls Reservoir, didn't find anything. But we set up our treatment for our 8.6 miles. We identified, as we went through the treatment, let me come back to that. Chelated copper again, we used the same Natrix product again at 1 part per million, this time doing a 200-hour treatment. So the label allows that flexibility for us to be that flexible in consultation with the manufacturer. And so we set up our treatment area. And we learned a lot as we went through that and applied some new tools. We identified some holes in the river that are about 100 feet deep. The geology in that canyon is amazing. And those of you that have been with us as we've gone through there, we've tried to show you that and give you an appreciation for the fact that you're going along and all of a sudden there's a 100-foot deep hole out of nowhere that now we think, at least in the Twin Falls Reservoir, was probably where some wake boats had come in and turned around and dumped water. That's our best guess. You're never going to know. But we did have to bring in special equipment from some of our sister state agencies with underwater drones and stuff to help us understand what was going on there, because it didn't treat the same as the rest of the river. Copper's heavy, goes right to the bottom. We couldn't hold our levels throughout that whole hole. So we found that. So let's talk a little bit about the how and what these responses look like. So on September 24th, Nick calls and says we have a positive detection. Almost immediately, I think within that same day, if I'm remembering correctly, our director, Chanel T-Walt, and I went and briefed the governor and explained to him where we were. Much similar to the conversation we had with him last year. We went in, explained to him where we were. He immediately called a cabinet meeting so that we could get together with members of the cabinet, especially the natural resource agencies, but also including transportation, DEQ, all those kind of folks were also in that cabinet meeting specifically to let them know what was going on, let them know that they may be called upon to help. This was a very important first step in this process to make sure it was a priority for everybody. So while Chanel and I were running the trap line that we need to with our sister agencies, state and federal, Nick and his group were doing their delimit sampling and their treatment planning on their end. So I think the first and the next important kind of point on this is that division of duty and making sure everybody has a job and what that productive job needs to be. We started the treatment on October 8th. We concluded it on October 19th. And today we're preparing, even as we speak this week, for a second treatment to go in and get some of the ponds and potholes around some of those falls areas. Obviously that covers some time on a calendar, and this was the primary thing that our agency was focused on, at least within this part of the shop, over that time period. And certainly it was a primary thing that Chanel and I and a couple other folks in the director's office and in fiscal, this was an agency-wide focus during this period of time, because it was a pretty big lift to get all of this done. That first step of defining what the infestation is and identifying tools and products is very important. To do that, you have to understand the water body. What's going on there? What's the flow? What's the chemistry? What's the depth? Is there any use in diversion? We're very lucky in the specific case of this stage of the river because it's in the middle of the Snake River system, but during the irrigation season, it's only 400 CFS because there's nearly total diversion for irrigation above where this point is in the canyon. So that's an operational and logistic help for us. And there's no use within the river other than folks that want to go in swimming, fishing, and doing that sort of thing. There's not a consumptive use in that particular section. There is downriver, there is upriver, just not in that section. No ESA concerns within the specific stretch. So these are all unique things in this specific stretch of the river that may be completely different nearly anywhere else in the state. So we got very lucky that way. But as you go through this process, the most important part of the how is understanding the team and the resources you have in front of you as an agency. On any kind of project like this is a very huge scope to deal with. We had folks doing this and only this for 6 to 8 weeks, including the planning and the surveys at the front of the season, to the clean up and mop up and put stuff away and the follow-up surveys at the end of it. That's all they did. And in the case of several of them, including Nick, who lives in Sandpoint, he was in southern Idaho for basically a month. So you have to know who you have, what their strengths are, and be able to make those assignments. We're very lucky that one of our staff, our section manager for noxious weeds, has led aquatic weed treatments for us now for, I don't know, what's he been here, Nick? 5, 6, 7 years? I've lost track. But he knows how to do that process very well. He knows the contractors, he knows the products. It's easy to give him that assignment to say, you go design the treatment plan. But you also have the logistics of those folks of, you know, what do they need? Where do they need to be? What's the scope of their work? What are their strengths and weaknesses? We have some members of our team that aren't going to be divers, obviously. I mean, that's a very technical thing. Some of them can't drive a trailer, or maybe they can, or whatever. You got to identify all those things. And you got to identify that you're going to take up their time for that much time, and at some point you're going to have to let them off. And I think it's an important operational consideration. Sitting on the rock there is not only Nick in side profile, but also Jeremy Varley, Jenny Romans, and Wes Bishop, who's with CPRO. And he's one of their main scientists. Every day, several times a day, they had to go do copper sampling to help calibrate the treatments. So they had several sites throughout the system where they had to go do that. And as a team, they had to do that because along the way, they're having to make operational decisions about how to calibrate what the dosage was going to look like. It took up a significant amount of their time. Equipment and logistics. This is something that I think sometimes people think you can account for this in a plan, but you really can't. Because in this particular area, we're in the bottom of a canyon with 3 man-made or natural impediments to keep us from getting places we needed to get to. So you need to know that you can get the equipment and the logistics there that you need to. You need to know that you can secure the area. You need to be able to enforce that quarantine. Can you get access? We're very fortunate. Idaho Power was very open with access for us. But I recognize that there may be facilities, either private or federal or whatever, that somebody might not be that lucky. We may not be that lucky in some other locations. What shifts are needed? Last year, we ran 24-hour shifts with all of our people, off and on. Some people did work 24 hours, and we told Nick and Jeremy at some point they needed to go take a nap. But you need to kind of know what that's going to look like. And we learned from last year, and this year we put ourselves more on normal, regular shifts. Are you going to need something special? Because we were in the canyon the way we are, we had to airlift 2 boats in to a section of the canyon. Easy enough. How hard was it to find a helicopter this year in the middle of fire season? Very difficult. And we had to pull a lot of strings, and the governor's office was very active, and the Department of Lands was very active in making sure we could get this 1 helicopter for half a day. Because there was a fire that blew up right above Boise the same time, and there were fighting fires up north here at the same time. Last year, we could find a private company on our own. This year, they were tied up, and it was amazing the contracting things you had to do. I, of course, naturally thought we could just go get the Guard to fly, but apparently we had to, call the Guard into duty like they were going to war, and that was apparently a thing. But these are the kind of considerations that, as you get into these, that you need to consider. And then you get into the day-to-day in these natural environments, realizing that there are things that are going to throw roadblocks up in front of you. And again, you need to know how you'll make some of these decisions. I will reiterate that these are really difficult to plan for ahead of time. It really has to be what's in front of you in that moment. On the left, and it kind of shows up, and I think Stephen and some of those folks that were with us will probably nod in agreement, I hope, that you can't appreciate what it looks like when you have to go through the minefield of rocks in this particular upper section of our treatment area until you get there. And the fact that we had a contractor that was taking tender boats through here several times a day, let alone the work we were doing, and we've never suffered, thank God, 1 injury or 1 equipment failure. But there were literal minefields to get through. You have to appreciate the fact that in the middle picture that you have a utility company that allows us to run Natrix through their system, through their diversion, not only through their powerhouse, but we turned Shoshone Falls blue with the Natrix that went over there because we're utilizing it as a mixing and injection point. And the fact that on the right picture, there's a boat in there, one of them that we airlifted in, that is part of what was doing the treatment to get that Shoshone Falls pool up to 1 part per million. And then we learned something important last year in that we needed a starting point each day for our crews. Last year, we sent out our emails, we had little group meetings, we sent everybody out, but everybody felt disconnected because they didn't really have anywhere to start their day. We just sent them to their operational point. You're going to go on a kayak and go pull copper samples, and you're going to go, on a motorboat and pull copper samples, and all of you will show back up at the copper lab, our field lab, at the end of the day with your stuff. This year we decided that doesn't work so good. So at 7 a.m. every morning, every member of the crew was obligated, with the exception of Nick and Jeremy, because they had their own little thing to do, which I don't know how they got out of it, probably because they knew my cooking. We cooked breakfast for the crew every morning and had it ready for them at 7 a.m., a hot breakfast. It's a little unconventional in a world where certainly you ought to be able to just go get muffins from Costco, which we've done in the past and did a little bit this year. But we made sure as they started their day, they had that starting point. They had the interaction and collaboration with each other. We had what we call volunteers, which are our way of saying non-program staff from within the agency or other agencies. We got them teamed up with who they needed to be teamed up with. There was a table full of snacks for them to put in their bag for the day because we weren't providing lunch. We stuffed them full of breakfast and sent them on their way. This was probably one of the most significant things we did in helping that group be productive. It made for some good mornings, even though some of the cooking conditions could be a little challenging. And recognize the value of people and making sure that they understand and can feel like the jobs they have are rewarding. The folks on the left, this must have been at the beginning of their service day, because I know that crew was doing fish collection and disposal the rest of that day. How do I know it's the beginning? Because they're all smiling. But those are important jobs. And when you go through this, you find those jobs that are really crappy, and you got to rotate everybody through so they're not doing the same crappy job every day. But you need it to be something where they feel like they're doing something important, that they have an understanding of what they're supposed to do each day, and they have that camaraderie. Sounds very touchy-feely for me, but it's important. The gentleman in the middle, I don't know how I put a picture of him in here again. I don't have a bromance with you, Nick, but that on-site field supervision of what's going on is also very important. Nick and Jeremy and crew had to do very important work in getting to each station each day so they understood what was going on and made sure things were going well. We rinsed out containers every day. So the folks on the right, that was another job. And we had to make sure they had the right PPE in order to pull that off. And again, rotate them through so they didn't have the same tough job each and every day. Jenny on the right there, she always smiles like that. Doesn't matter what she's doing. It's a little bit disconcerting, to be honest with you. You do have natural beauty in some of what you do, and you do have some of those challenges. Where the boat is on the left is at the upper end of the treatment area. And we initially, when we started writing the plan, we knew we wanted to push the treatment area up as far as we could above Twin Falls Reservoir. This is as far as we could get. I think just a couple 100 yards beyond this point is the first waterfall before the canyon really narrows up. That channel that the boat is sitting in is all of maybe 15 feet wide, with those big boulders kind of underneath and all around it. That's as far as we could go. So we carried up the crew. I shouldn't say we, I wasn't on this part, but the crew carried up empty totes, placed them there, linked them up together, and then that was what the tender boat went up and filled every day. There's actually those are on the opposite side of the canyon, opposite side of the channel. There is another set of 3 or 4 totes as well, at all hours. That's the moon coming up in the back. Thought it was a nice picture. And again, that consultation and collaboration in the middle again, as we pull copper samples again and work on calibrating again. It's a constant effort. The treatment we were doing, it required that constant effort because you have water coming into the system, you have levels that are changing, temperatures that are changing it. You're pulling those deep samples at night, which is what the picture is on the right. All of it focuses on that collaboration of all the agencies involved. And so, again, for us, the important thing that we have enjoyed in our program has been a direction from the legislature and from the governor's office, and understanding of the prioritization that needs to happen. Every one of the agencies on here, none of them ever told us no. They called from the outset this year, how can we help? There's agencies on there that we utilized heavily last year that we didn't this year because we changed some things in how we did a couple of the operations so that we didn't have to run 24 hours. But they called at the beginning of the season, even though their folks put in a tremendous amount of overtime last year, wanting to know how they could help. In fact, I had to call some of them. I felt bad because we weren't utilizing them so much this year, and I didn't want them to feel put out that they weren't getting a call this year. So that's the important thing, is it needs to be in such a priority that you can call upon all of those folks. We did enjoy the visits that we've had from Washington and Oregon and BC, and I forget who all came. Stephen came and hung out with us for a few days. Stephen Phillips has been a very important resource for us, really indispensable with a lot of advice and a sounding board. Last year we were scared to death, and I think Nick and I probably called Stephen more than we needed to, and I would talk nice about him even if his boss wouldn't sit next to him. But you need to have those folks to bounce those ideas off of. So I think those are all very important things. So with that, Justin, that's all I got for slides. Happy to answer any questions.